The first time I saw the Westgrove House, it was shrouded in fog so thick it seemed to breathe. The taxi driver refused to take me past the iron gate, muttering something about old promises before driving away, tires spinning on the wet gravel. I stood there, suitcase in hand, staring at the house that now belonged to me, an inheritance from an uncle I barely remembered, a man whose name was mentioned only in whispers during family dinners. The first time the narrator sees Westgrove House, the moment is steeped in unease and atmospheric dread, setting the tone for everything that follows. The fog, described as so thick it seemed to breathe, isn't just a visual detail, it's a living presence that blurs the line between the natural and the supernatural. This kind of description personifies the environment, making it seem sentient, as if the house and its surroundings are aware of the narrator's arrival and are silently watching. Fog often represents mystery, concealment, and uncertainty, and here it acts as both a literal and symbolic veil, obscuring what is to come and suggesting that the truth about Westgrove House, and perhaps the narrator's own past, lies hidden beneath layers that must be uncovered. The setting itself becomes a character, breathing with life, anticipation, and a quiet warning that something old and unresolved lingers in the air. The taxi driver's refusal to go past the iron gate introduces the first human reaction to the place, reinforcing the sense of foreboding. His muttering about old promises hints at a history of debts, vows, or obligations connected to the house, perhaps of a dark or supernatural nature. The phrase is cryptic but powerful. It implies that there are pacts or curses still binding people, or even the land itself, to past events. The fact that the driver refuses to even approach the house speaks volumes. It's not fear of the physical place, but of something unseen and unspoken, something that ordinary people instinctively avoid. His rapid departure, tires spinning on wet gravel, creates a striking contrast to the narrator's stillness, as if two worlds are diverging, the world of those who know better than to approach, and the world of the one who is now inevitably drawn in. The narrator's act of standing at the gate, suitcase in hand, is a moment of both literal and symbolic transition. The iron gate itself serves as a boundary between safety and danger, between the known world and the unknown realm of family secrets and lingering presences. Iron has long been associated with protection against the supernatural in folklore, yet here it stands as a barrier keeping the world out, or perhaps keeping something within. The narrator crossing that threshold, even mentally as he stares through the fog, is an initiation into inheritance, memory, and mystery. It's the first step toward uncovering whatever truth Westgrove House guards so jealously. The inheritance itself adds another layer of unease. The narrator describes it as coming from an uncle he barely remembered, a man whose name was mentioned only in whispers during family dinners. This detail reveals that the uncle was an outcast within the family, someone whose story was intentionally silenced. The act of whispering carries weight. It means that whatever is associated with his name is taboo, possibly dangerous or shameful. There's a legacy of fear or guilt surrounding him, and now that same legacy has passed to the narrator. The inheritance isn't merely property, it's a burden, a continuation of something unresolved. The house, in this light, becomes a physical manifestation of the family's hidden history, a repository of whatever they tried to bury. The narrator's emotional state in this scene can be inferred through his actions and the atmosphere. There's no excitement or joy at receiving an inheritance. Instead, the tone is subdued, almost reluctant. Standing alone in the fog, with no one to welcome him and no driver willing to stay, the narrator feels isolated. The imagery evokes not triumph but displacement. He doesn't belong here yet, but fate has placed him on this threshold nonetheless. The weather mirrors his uncertainty, the fog blurs the world, concealing both danger and truth, while the wet gravel under his feet suggests instability, as if the very ground is uncertain about accepting his presence. Thematically, this first encounter establishes the core conflict of the story, man versus the haunted inheritance of his bloodline. The narrator's journey begins not with discovery but with apprehension, and the atmosphere carries that tension wordlessly. Every element, the breathing fog, the iron gate, the muttering driver, the silent house, works in unison to create a feeling of predestination, as though the narrator's arrival was not a choice but an inevitability written long ago. The house that now belonged to me carries a chilling duality. On the surface, it's a statement of ownership, but underneath, it implies possession in the other direction. Perhaps the house owns him now, not the other way around. The word belonged can cut both ways, especially in a Gothic setting where houses have memories, where they absorb the lives and deaths of those who inhabit them. The narrative perspective also strengthens the sense of intimacy and dread. The use of first-person narration pulls the reader directly into the protagonist's perception, allowing the house to emerge not just as a setting but as a psychological reflection of the narrator himself. The fog could symbolize his own confusion or inherited guilt, while the silence around him mirrors the silence that has always surrounded his uncle's story. This blending of inner and outer worlds creates a sense that Westgrove House isn't just a physical inheritance but a mirror of the narrator's subconscious, a place where suppressed memories and unspoken truths are waiting to rise. Every sensory detail adds to the effect. The wet gravel suggests coldness and instability, the fog muffles sound, creating a claustrophobic silence, and the faint glow of the unseen house through the mist gives the impression that it is alive, watching. These are classic Gothic elements, but they are employed with psychological subtlety rather than overt terror. The fear comes from what is not said, from the pauses and hesitations in the narration, and from the feeling that history is about to repeat itself. Ultimately, this opening scene functions as an invitation and a warning. It draws the reader into a world where place, memory, and bloodline are inseparable. The narrator is not stepping into a mere house but into the echo of generations, into promises once made and never fulfilled. The key point here is the atmosphere of inheritance and inevitability, the sense that the narrator has not simply received a house but has been chosen by it, that the fog, the driver's words, and the silence of the house are all parts of a larger, ancient design now closing around him. The taxi driver's refusal to go past the iron gate and his muttered reference to old promises form the second key point in the scene, and this moment holds deep symbolic and narrative significance. It introduces a sense of collective memory and local superstition, positioning the house not just as an isolated setting but as part of a living mythology that extends beyond the narrator's personal experience. The driver represents the voice of the outside world, a witness to the legacy of fear and silence surrounding Westgrove House. His behavior suggests that the house has a reputation known to others, something dark enough that even those unconnected to the family feel compelled to keep their distance. The driver's refusal isn't merely professional caution, it is rooted in something instinctive, almost primal, as if some unspoken rule forbids trespass beyond that point. When he mutters about old promises, the words resonate like an echo from the past, hinting at ancient obligations or oaths that have outlived their makers. It is a fragment of forgotten history breaking through into the present moment. In Gothic storytelling, such warnings from locals often act as thresholds, the last chance for the protagonist to turn back before entering the unknown. But in this case, the driver's words are not delivered as a dramatic warning, they are barely spoken, more like something slipped unintentionally, as though even mentioning the house aloud carries risk. The quiet tone makes it more unsettling, because it feels genuine, unforced, and shaped by lived fear. The fact that he doesn't elaborate leaves both the narrator and the reader suspended in uncertainty, forced to imagine what those old promises might have been. Were they vows of protection, of secrecy, or perhaps bargains made to contain something within the estate? The ambiguity of the phrase opened space for speculation, allowing the atmosphere of dread to deepen through mystery rather than revelation. The driver's hasty departure also contrasts sharply with the narrator's lingering curiosity. The image of the taxi's tires spinning on the wet gravel, scattering stones as it speeds away, visually reinforces the urgency of his fear. The sound of retreat becomes the first movement in a pattern of isolation that defines the narrator's relationship with the house. The driver's abandonment leaves him physically alone and psychologically vulnerable, standing before a place everyone else avoids. This moment isolates him from society, symbolically cutting his ties to the ordinary world. From this point forward, the narrator is stepping into a realm governed by the logic of inheritance, memory, and haunting, a space where rational explanations will no longer suffice. There is also something telling in how the driver's fear contrasts with the narrator's initial detachment. The narrator has not yet internalized the weight of the place. To him, Westgrove House is still a property, a legal inheritance, a physical structure. But to the driver, it is a myth, a living curse, something that carries a presence beyond walls and deeds. This difference in perception highlights one of the story's central dynamics, the tension between those who see the house as part of the real world and those who understand it as part of something older, more spiritual, and more dangerous. The narrator's ignorance makes him an outsider in his own family's history, while the driver's instinctive fear marks him as someone who, though not connected by blood, is more in tune with the truth. The phrase, "old promises," anchors the entire exchange in the realm of obligation and unfinished business. A promise implies intention, choice, and continuity. It binds the past to the present. But an old promise, especially one still whispered about, implies a failure to keep it or a curse tied to its breaking. It could refer to an ancestral vow made by the narrator's uncle, perhaps even generations before, that was never fulfilled. Inherited guilt is a common thread in Gothic fiction, and here it appears through the language of promises. It suggests that the family's history is not just shameful but binding, that they're entangled in moral or supernatural debts that cannot easily be erased. The driver's fear, then, is not only of the house itself but of the consequences that come from ignoring or breaking these inherited oaths. This interaction also reveals something subtle about the power of rumor and collective fear. The driver's behavior is shaped by local memory, stories passed through generations, perhaps half believed but deeply felt. These communal legends form an invisible boundary around Westgrove House, one maintained not by walls but by silence and avoidance. The driver's refusal to cross that boundary keeps him safe but also perpetuates the myth. His silence ensures that the house remains shrouded in mystery. This creates a kind of social isolation for the estate, cutting it off from the living world and allowing whatever lingers there to fester untouched. The narrator's arrival threatens to disturb this balance, reopening what others have tried to keep sealed. From a psychological standpoint, the scene underscores how fear can be inherited even without direct experience. The driver has likely never seen anything supernatural himself, yet his fear feels authentic because it's reinforced by community belief. This reflects the theme of generational trauma, how certain places or names can carry emotional weight long after the original cause is forgotten. The driver's reaction shows how myths become self-sustaining, how fear itself can be an inheritance passed down, shaping behavior without conscious understanding. His muttered words, "old promises," therefore carry both the burden of history and the echo of superstition, making the house's presence feel inescapable even for outsiders. The narrator's reaction to the driver's refusal is equally telling. He doesn't argue or press for details, he simply accepts it, internalizing the unease rather than confronting it. This passivity reveals an important trait, an underlying receptiveness to the atmosphere around him. Even before stepping inside, he begins to absorb the fear of others, becoming part of the story he doesn't yet understand. His stillness at the gate, following the driver's departure, becomes a visual embodiment of this psychological shift. The fog, the silence, and the memory of the driver's muttered words merge into a single, oppressive awareness that the house is not just an inheritance but a demand. It calls him forward even as the rest of the world flees. In that moment, the contrast between human instinct and human curiosity defines the entire emotional architecture of the story. The driver acts on instinct, he obeys the old warning buried in his culture. The narrator, driven by curiosity and obligation, suppresses that instinct and steps toward the unknown. The driver's retreat and the narrator's approach create a symbolic handoff. The fear that one man abandons becomes the burden another must carry. The echo of old promises lingers in the mist, transforming from a passing remark into a prophecy that will follow the narrator into the depths of Westgrove House, binding him to a fate long sealed by the silence of those who came before. When the narrator stands before the iron gate of Westgrove House, suitcase in hand, a profound stillness settles over the scene, a moment charged with symbolism and quiet inevitability. This is the third key point of the passage, and it marks the instant where inheritance transforms from an abstract concept into a tangible, almost spiritual burden. The image of the narrator alone in the fog, facing the house that now belongs to him, operates on several levels: literal, emotional, and symbolic. It is a moment of crossing, not yet physical but deeply psychological, a pause before entry into the unknown. The gate, the fog, and the solitary figure together create a tableau that reflects both entrapment and initiation. The narrator has inherited not just a property but a legacy of silence, and this moment represents his first confrontation with it. The iron gate stands as a barrier between two worlds, the known and the mysterious, the safe and the cursed. It is a threshold, and in Gothic literature, thresholds are never simple physical boundaries, they are metaphors for transformation. To cross them means to accept change, to enter a place where ordinary rules no longer apply. The narrator's hesitation before the gate conveys an intuitive awareness that what lies beyond is not merely a house but a force that will alter him. Iron, as a material, traditionally symbolizes protection. It is the metal used to ward off evil spirits in folklore. Yet here, the gate of iron functions not as protection for those within but as a warning for those without. It's as if the barrier was meant to keep the world safe from whatever rests inside rather than to keep intruders out. The irony of standing before a gate that both invites and forbids entry deepens the tension of the scene. The fog wrapping around the narrator heightens this sensation of liminality. Fog is not simply weather, it is a manifestation of uncertainty, blurring boundaries between what is real and imagined. It softens the lines of the world, swallowing detail and sound, creating an atmosphere where memory and present reality merge. In this way, the fog becomes an external expression of the narrator's inner confusion. He has arrived at a place that is legally his but emotionally alien. The obscured view of the house mirrors his incomplete understanding of his inheritance. He can see its outline but not its truth. The fog seemed to breathe, as the passage describes earlier, giving it life, an organic, almost sentient quality that surrounds him like the slow inhalation of the past drawing him in. The narrator's stillness, his act of standing motionless, suitcase in hand, is crucial. This physical image speaks of hesitation, awe, and a quiet resignation. He is not portrayed as a man rushing forward but as one observing, absorbing the weight of what lies ahead. The suitcase in his hand suggests both arrival and displacement. It symbolizes transience, the idea of someone who has come from elsewhere, someone unrooted. Yet it also emphasizes the finality of the moment. He has arrived at a destination from which there may be no easy departure. The suitcase, holding the essentials of his life, represents the last fragment of his old world. Soon, it will lose meaning as he steps into a space that exists outside ordinary time and logic. The house itself, though still distant and half hidden by fog, looms in the narrator's imagination as a living entity. It is described as belonging to him, but the tone of the statement carries unease. Ownership, in this context, feels less like privilege and more like possession in the reverse sense, that the house owns him, that it has been waiting. The word belonged has a haunting ambiguity. Grammatically, it indicates property, but emotionally, it suggests entrapment. The narrator's arrival fulfills a cycle, as if he were always meant to stand there, inheriting not just a home but a destiny written long before his birth. This moment also reveals the deep isolation of the narrator's situation. The driver's refusal to go further has left him utterly alone. The silence that follows the taxi's departure is not peaceful but oppressive, as though the fog absorbs every sound, leaving only the faint hum of his own breath. Isolation is one of the key emotional registers of Gothic storytelling. It strips away the distractions of the outside world, forcing the protagonist into direct confrontation with the past, the self, and the unseen. The narrator's solitude here is total. There is no witness to his first encounter with Westgrove House, no companion to share his unease. This aloneness amplifies his vulnerability. The house waits in silence, the fog shifts faintly, and he stands suspended between decision and fate. On a psychological level, the moment represents the narrator's first surrender to the influence of the place. Standing before the gate, he is already being absorbed by its atmosphere. The fog's breath, the silence of the grounds, the heaviness of the air, all seem to shape his thoughts. He doesn't question the strangeness of the scene or the driver's fear. Instead, he accepts it, internalizing the tension. This quiet acceptance foreshadows how easily he will later yield to the house's deeper mysteries. It is as if the house begins working on him before he even steps inside, drawing from his curiosity and his loneliness to pull him closer. The symbolic resonance of inheritance deepens through this stillness. Inheritance is not merely the transfer of property, it is the continuation of legacy, and legacies are often stained with secrets. The narrator's family avoided speaking of the uncle from whom he inherited the estate. That silence, carried through generations, is itself a kind of inheritance, a burden of unspoken guilt or fear. Standing at the gate, the narrator physically inherits the silence that has long surrounded the name of Westgrove. The weight of generation seems to hang in the fog, as if the house has been waiting to claim him as the next link in an unbroken chain. The gate, in this way, marks the division between history and experience. On one side lies the world of hearsay, the half-remembered stories whispered during family dinners. On the other side lies the truth, the lived, immediate reality of the house and its hidden influence. By standing there, the narrator exists momentarily in both worlds, neither fully within the mystery nor safely outside it. The scene freezes this liminal state in time, a brief suspension before he crosses over completely. The imagery of this moment also evokes ideas of fate and inevitability. There is no dramatic choice being made, the narrator doesn't resolve to enter boldly, nor does he attempt to flee. Instead, he is held still by a quiet recognition that the course of events has already been set in motion. The fog breathes, the house looms, and he stands as the final figure in a long pattern repeating itself. This sense of fatalism is key to the Gothic mood. It suggests that human will is powerless against forces of history, blood, and place. Westgrove House does not need to invite him, his mere presence fulfills its call. The silence between him and the gate becomes the unspoken acceptance of a contract written long ago, binding him to whatever waits inside. The inheritance from the uncle whom the narrator barely remembered introduces the fourth key point in the passage and becomes the emotional and thematic center of the story's unease. It is not a gift of wealth or comfort but a mysterious burden, something heavy with unspoken history and latent dread. The narrator's relationship to this uncle is distant, almost non-existent, yet the inheritance ties them together across death. The uncle's name was mentioned only in whispers during family dinners, and this single detail conveys volumes about the atmosphere surrounding him. Whispered names in a family suggest shame, fear, or secrecy, things too dangerous or painful to speak aloud. The uncle becomes a ghost long before death makes him one, erased from open conversation but never fully gone from the family's consciousness. Through this inheritance, the narrator is not just receiving property but stepping into the silence that once surrounded that name, taking on the weight of whatever was left unspoken. Inheritance in Gothic storytelling often carries more than legal implications. It embodies the transfer of sin, guilt, or unresolved debt from one generation to the next. The house, as the physical manifestation of the inheritance, becomes a repository of memory, where the walls hold on to secrets that the living have tried to forget. The uncle's life, shrouded in half-truths and avoidance, seems to have stained the property itself, turning it into a monument of secrecy. The narrator's family, by whispering rather than speaking, has preserved the mystery instead of dispelling it, ensuring that the emotional residue of the past remains active. When the narrator inherits the house, he inherits that emotional residue too, the guilt, the avoidance, and the unresolved tension between memory and denial. The whispering of his family echoes in his mind as he stands before Westgrove House, making him feel like he is entering not merely a building but a story that has been quietly waiting to ensnare him. The inheritance also introduces the theme of the unwanted legacy. The narrator's tone when he mentions the inheritance is not one of excitement or gratitude, it is subdued, tinged with apprehension. This reaction reveals that what he has inherited is not seen as a blessing but as something ominous, perhaps even cursed. The uncle's memory, the family's fear, and the isolated nature of the house combine to create an inheritance that feels alive, as though it has chosen him rather than the other way around. There is no mention of the narrator seeking the property or expecting it. Instead, it arrives in his life like an inevitability, an unwanted gift that cannot be refused. In this way, the act of inheritance blurs the line between choice and fate. He is drawn to the house because it is his, yet he senses instinctively that it may own him in return. The idea that the uncle was barely remembered adds a layer of irony to the inheritance. How does one inherit something from a man one hardly knew? The lack of emotional connection makes the event even stranger, almost impersonal, as if the house itself has decided to pass on rather than the man who once owned it. The narrator's ignorance about his uncle mirrors his ignorance about the estate's history, suggesting that the true inheritance is not the property but the mystery itself. The silence surrounding the uncle's name becomes a silence surrounding his life, his actions, and whatever events transpired within Westgrove House. By inheriting the house, the narrator inherits that silence and the responsibility to uncover or endure it. The past that his family has buried now becomes his to face. The whispered references to the uncle also imply that he may have violated some moral or social boundary that caused his family to erase him from memory. The nature of that transgression is not revealed, but its presence lingers. In Gothic fiction, such an omission often signals a dark secret, madness, crime, forbidden knowledge, or a pact that bound the family to something supernatural. Whatever the case, the family's choice to suppress the truth does not dissolve its power. Silence, in this context, becomes a form of preservation rather than protection. By refusing to confront the past, the family has allowed it to fester and take root in the very structure of Westgrove House. The inheritance thus acts as a reckoning, forcing the narrator to face the consequences of generations of avoidance. The emotional distance between the narrator and his uncle also mirrors the broader emotional detachment within the family. The fact that the uncle's name was only ever whispered hints at a culture of repression, where difficult emotions and dark histories are buried rather than expressed. This repression seeps into the narrator's psyche as he approaches the house. He may not consciously know what happened, but he feels the unease that has surrounded the family for years. His uneasiness at receiving the inheritance is not just fear of the unknown but recognition of something inherited psychologically, a legacy of avoidance and denial. He senses that he is stepping into the silence his family created, becoming the one who must give voice to what they refuse to speak. The inheritance also inverts the traditional meaning of belonging. When the narrator says the house now belonged to me, the statement carries a hollow triumph. In ordinary circumstances, to own something is to have control over it, but here, the ownership feels inverted. The phrasing subtly implies that the narrator belongs to the house just as much as it belongs to him. The sense of possession moves both ways. The house has been waiting, and now, with the uncle gone, it has claimed the next of kin. This reversal of ownership aligns with the Gothic idea that old places hold power over those who inherit them, that the living do not dominate their possessions but become their caretakers, their keepers, sometimes even their prisoners. The inheritance thus becomes a chain rather than a gift, a continuation of something the narrator cannot escape. The tone of the passage reinforces the inevitability of this inheritance. There is no mention of refusal, no question of whether the narrator wanted the house. It arrives as an established fact, a matter already decided. This inevitability gives the moment an air of destiny, as if the narrator was always meant to return to Westgrove House, drawn by the bloodline he shares with the uncle. The family's silence now feels like part of a larger pattern, a web of secrecy designed to keep the living from questioning the dead until one of them is finally pulled back to the source. The narrator, as the last link in this chain, becomes the vessel through which the past will surface again. The uncle's absence becomes more haunting than his presence could have been. A man forgotten by his own family, yet powerful enough to leave behind a house filled with echoes, embodies the Gothic ideal of the unseen influence. His silence shapes the atmosphere as tangibly as the fog and the iron gate. Through inheritance, he reasserts himself into the family story, forcing remembrance upon those who tried to forget. The narrator's arrival, then, is not just the beginning of a personal journey, it is the resurrection of a memory that refuses to stay buried. The inheritance, born of whispers and shadows, becomes the instrument through which the dead uncle finally speaks again. The narrator's emotional state as he stands before Westgrove House forms the fifth key point in the passage, and it captures the transition from ordinary apprehension to a deeper, almost instinctive sense of dread. Though the narrator does not explicitly describe his feelings, the surrounding imagery and tone reveal them with quiet precision. He stands in the fog, holding his suitcase, staring at the house that now belongs to him, yet there is no trace of excitement, curiosity, or satisfaction. Instead, there is a muted heaviness, a mixture of confusion, fear, and reluctant acceptance. His silence mirrors the silence of the setting, and that shared stillness blurs the boundary between his emotions and the atmosphere around him. The house seems to project its unease onto him, as though his mood is being shaped not by his own thoughts but by the weight of the place itself. The fog, the wet gravel, the cold air, all these details externalize what he feels inside, making the environment an extension of his psyche. The narrator's feelings can be understood as a kind of emotional paralysis. He has arrived at a place that should represent inheritance, belonging, and continuity, but instead it confronts him with estrangement. Everything about Westgrove House feels foreign to him, its silence, its isolation, even its presence. This disconnection from his inheritance underscores the deeper theme of displacement that runs beneath the scene. The narrator is technically the owner of the estate, but emotionally he is an outsider, an intruder in his own family's history. His lack of clear memory of his uncle reinforces this alienation. The man who left him this property is a stranger, and the house that once belonged to that man feels equally unknown. This emotional distance transforms what could have been a moment of closure into a moment of awakening dread. The tone of the passage is one of quiet inevitability. The narrator does not resist the situation or express disbelief, instead, he simply stands there, allowing the moment to envelop him. This acceptance suggests that, on some level, he senses that resistance would be useless. The silence that stretches between him and the house feels like a conversation already taking place, a wordless understanding that his presence has been anticipated. The fog around him becomes a metaphor for this inner resignation, blurring his sense of control and direction. He cannot see clearly ahead, yet he continues to stand still, as though waiting for something unseen to decide his next move. This stillness is not calm but charged with tension, like the quiet before a storm. The narrator's unease is further emphasized by his physical isolation. The departure of the taxi driver leaves him entirely alone, severing his last link to the world outside. The wet gravel beneath his feet, the sound of retreating tires fading into silence, all contribute to the feeling that he has crossed an invisible threshold. There is no return now, no simple way to undo the moment. The world has withdrawn, and he is left with only the fog and the looming outline of the house. This isolation magnifies his fear because it strips away the comfort of rationality and companionship. He has no one to ask questions, no one to share the burden of uncertainty. The silence of Westgrove House becomes a mirror for his solitude, amplifying his thoughts until even the faintest sound, a shifting wind, a creaking gate, feels alive with meaning. The fear that grips him in this moment is not immediate terror but something more profound, the dread of the unknown. It is the kind of fear that arises not from what is seen but from what might be hidden, from the sense that something vast and incomprehensible is waiting just beyond perception. The fog embodies this perfectly. It hides the world but also suggests that the hidden world is still there, watching. The narrator's hesitation reflects this duality. He is afraid not because he knows something is wrong, but because he cannot be sure that anything is right. The house's silence, the driver's strange words, the weight of inheritance, all combine to create an atmosphere of suspended certainty. He is caught in the space between disbelief and intuition, where logic offers no comfort. The emotional undercurrent of guilt also seeps subtly into this moment. Although the narrator has done nothing wrong, he carries the psychological burden of his family's avoidance. His uncle's memory was erased, and the silence surrounding him was maintained by generations. Now, by inheriting the house, the narrator has unknowingly become the bearer of that silence. The unease he feels is not only fear of the supernatural but guilt inherited through bloodline, a sense that he is complicit in something unnamed, part of a family story he was never told but cannot escape. His discomfort is therefore not just fear of what lies ahead but recognition of a past that has finally caught up with him. The description of the setting reinforces this internal struggle. The fog breathes like a living thing, the gravel is wet and unstable, the iron gate looms like a threshold into another realm. These external elements create a psychological landscape that reflects the narrator's mental state. He feels suspended between realities, the rational world he left behind when the taxi drove away and the strange, dreamlike world represented by the estate. The moment is defined by ambiguity, and in Gothic literature, such ambiguity is essential. It is what transforms ordinary fear into existential dread. The narrator's uncertainty about the house, the inheritance, and even himself, creates a tension that cannot be resolved by reason. There is also an undercurrent of inevitability that makes the narrator's emotions more complex. Though he is uneasy, there is a sense that he has been drawn to this place by something larger than choice. The language of inheritance implies destiny. The property was always meant to come to him, and his arrival feels preordained. This awareness deepens his unease, because it removes any illusion of control. The narrator's fear is not only of the unknown but of inevitability itself, the knowledge that whatever waits inside Westgrove House has been waiting for him. The silence surrounding his uncle's name now feels like a summons, a call finally answered. The house has claimed him through inheritance, and his presence fulfills an old pattern. The emotional complexity of this moment lies in its restraint. There are no overt expressions of panic or despair, only quiet dread and reluctant curiosity. The narrator's silence allows the reader to project their own sense of fear onto the scene, making the moment more intimate and unsettling. His lack of spoken thought or reaction gives the impression of someone already subdued by the weight of circumstance, someone who understands, consciously or not, that he has entered a story much older than himself. The stillness of the fog, the isolation, and the cold air around him press inward, erasing the distinction between environment and emotion. His fear becomes inseparable from the landscape, and the house becomes a reflection of his own uncertainty. The narrator's quiet acceptance of this moment does not come from courage but from inevitability, from the deep, instinctive understanding that he is no longer merely standing before Westgrove House, he is already part of it.